Let's talk about the Enlightenment. It wasn't just some dusty historical period. It was a complete explosion of intellectual energy that totally changed the course of human history. I mean, think about the words we use all the time: freedom, rights, revolution. The very DNA of those ideas was forged in this incredible era.
But let me ask you a question, and it's a deceptively simple one. Have you ever really stopped to think about where a concept like your rights even comes from? It feels so natural, so fundamental to us now, but it's not. That idea had to be invented by someone, and that's the story we're going to dive into.
So what sparked all this? Well, here's the surprising part. This whole world-changing movement didn't start with politics or protests. Nope, it started with something much more basic, a complete revolution in how people thought about knowledge itself.
And you can see the before and after shot right here. For centuries, the old way was pretty straightforward. Truth came from the top down. Whatever the king, the church, or your ancestors said, well, that was that. But the Enlightenment, which grew right out of the scientific revolution, kicked the door down. People started saying, hang on a second, I'm not just going to take your word for it. They wanted evidence. They wanted to use their own minds and see things with their own two eyes.
The first major tool in their new intellectual toolkit was rationalism. And really, all that means is trusting your own brain. It's the belief that you can figure things out step by step using clear, logical thought. It's about building an argument from the ground up instead of just accepting what you've always been told.
And the perfect partner to that was the second tool, empiricism. If rationalism is the think-it-through part, empiricism is the prove-it part. It's the idea that you can't just sit in a room and think your way to every answer. You have to get out into the world. You have to observe, measure, and experiment. You have to test your ideas against reality.
Okay, so you've got these two powerful new ways of thinking: reason and observation. At first, people used them to study planets and plants. But then they turned those tools on society itself. They started applying logic to things like government, power, and human nature. And that's when things got explosive.
You can almost watch the dominoes fall in a perfect, logical line. First, a new focus on the individual. The most important unit of society isn't the kingdom or the church anymore, it's you. From there, it's a short hop to the next idea, that every single individual is born with certain natural rights, which of course leads to the big question, what's the point of government? And the new answer was revolutionary. Its job is to protect those rights. Period.
And you can see how these ideas lock together like building blocks. Individualism is the foundation. The person comes first. Natural rights are the walls, giving you inherent protections. And the social contract, that's the roof. It's this radical idea that government isn't some divine entity, but something that we, the people, create voluntarily for the specific purpose of protecting our stuff. It works for us, not the other way around.
But this whole line of thinking leads to a really dangerous question, a question that could get you in a whole lot of trouble. If we create the government to protect our rights, what happens when the government itself is the one violating them? What then?
The answer was pure dynamite. It was that if the government breaks the deal is off. The ultimate power lies with the people. And if your government becomes a threat to your liberty, you have the right, and some thinkers argued the duty, to get rid of it. This wasn't just philosophy anymore. This was a permission slip for revolution. And believe me, these ideas did not stay tucked away in dusty books. They jumped off the page and into the real world. They became the fuel, the very spark that ignited a fire across the globe, kicking off what we now call the Age of Revolutions.
And the effect was like a shockwave. You see it erupt everywhere. The American colonies in 1776, France in 1789, the incredible revolution of enslaved people in Haiti in 1791, and then all across Latin America. In every case, people were using this brand new language of rights and contracts to say the old rulers have broken the deal. It's time to write a new one.
And a fascinating side effect of all this was the birth of modern nationalism. When you get people to unite to overthrow a foreign king and rule themselves, it forges this incredibly powerful sense of us, of a shared identity as a people. That idea of the nation would go on to be a defining and sometimes very dangerous force for centuries to come.
So the ideals were grand: liberty, equality, rights for all. But the reality on the ground, well, it was a lot messier. The question of who exactly counted as the people was full of contradictions, and it kicked off a long and still ongoing fight for inclusion.
And just look at how stark that reality was. This is the United States right after its revolution, based on the consent of the governed.
And who could actually vote? A tiny, tiny fraction of the population. Basically white guys who owned property. The ideals had set this incredible new standard, but the fight to actually live up to it had only just begun.
And you simply cannot talk about contradictions without facing the biggest, most horrific one of all, slavery. How can you build a society on the idea of natural rights while literally buying and selling human beings? The hypocrisy was breathtaking, and it gave the growing abolitionist movement an incredibly powerful moral and logical weapon to fight with.
Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. Change didn't just come from debates in fancy drawing rooms. It was forced. It was demanded by the enslaved people themselves through acts of resistance. The Great Jamaica Revolt in 1831, for example, was a massive uprising that made the cost of continuing slavery undeniable. It was a direct catalyst that pressured the British government to finally abolish it just 2 years later.
But the story doesn't end there, because one of the most powerful things about the Enlightenment is how its own tools, reason, logic, demanding your rights, were then turned back on itself to expose its own failures and expand its promise.
And one of the most obvious blind spots was gender. For all the lofty talk of universal rights, the documents were often called things like the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And they meant it, literally. Women were almost entirely excluded from this new political world.
The response to this was just brilliant. In France, a writer named Olympe de Gouges saw the revolution's famous declaration and basically said, "Hold my beer." She took their sacred document and just rewrote it point for point as the Declaration of the Rights of Woman. It was an incredible act of using their own logic to call them out on their hypocrisy.
And that was the spark. Early feminists like Mary Wollstonecraft made the airtight logical argument. If reason is what makes us human and deserving of rights, and women can reason, well, you do the math. This same logic fueled the Seneca Falls Conference in America, the first organized demand for women's right to vote. The core argument was pure enlightenment. Your promises of equality must apply to everyone.
So if you boil this whole thing down to one crucial takeaway, it's this. The Enlightenment completely flipped the script on power. We went from a world where truth and power were handed down from above, from a king or a priest, to a world built on the idea that individual reason is the guide, and governments only get their legitimacy from us, the governed.
And that brings us right back to now. Because these ideas aren't just history, they're alive. They are the very foundation of our arguments about freedom, justice, and equality today. So the real question it leaves for us is this: how do we keep that spirit alive? How can we apply that same critical inquiry to the massive challenges that we face in our own time?